Doc, I received your questions based on your job description and based on your resume as well. I'll go over those questions in this interview preparation call. Hopefully, it will help you in getting interview style answers to your questions. And definitely, people who are who are listening to this recording should also benefit from this conversations and discussions that we are going to have. With that being said, Doc, here are like I'm reading through the questions that you've emailed us, so I think we'll be much efficient in answering them. The question is, how did I collaborate? How do I collaborate with cross-functional teams like research and development, regulatory authorities, and clients? So basically, um, you will always start off with any collaborated questions from a subject standpoint. You would say that you collaborated with uh, internal stakeholders like clinical operations, medical writing for DSURs, clinical operations because it's a clinical trial role that you are going into, and also you will say that being from a CRO side, based on your resume, you collaborated with the end clients or sponsors. We don't use the word clients, but we use the word sponsor. So whoever is sponsoring the study, you're working you're working with them. So all the time, you will do pharmacovigilance activities like writing a DSUR or writing the benefit risk assessments of a DSUR or reviewing the safety sections of an IB with the concerned parties. Like for example, when you write a DSUR, you will be collaborating more with data management. When you're doing an IB, definitely IB is a clinical document. So you will be collaborating with clinical operations, medical writing for sure. Even for a DSUR, you're not going to write a DSUR. You're going to draft sections of a DSUR. Um, so that way you'll always try to answer this question based on your role as a pharmacovigilance scientist or a pharmacovigilance physician, and always saying that you did something with pharmacovigilance perspective, like how I'm going to narrate in the next few questions. The same thing with how did I contribute to regulatory submissions like NDA amendments related to safety data. So here you got to be very, I would say, you should not be saying too much on this because submissions is not any regulatory submissions like NDA filing or IND filings or anything to do with marketing authorization. It's a whole team effort. The whole pharmaceutical company will be doing a submission. It's not like you are a safety physician or a safety scientist and you alone are doing it. You will probably would answer this question better in saying that you supported regulatory submissions, like for example, reviewing the safety content of a CSR, clinical summary report. Because clinical summary report by the end of the day is the bulk of NDA filing, and you would say you reviewed it from a safety perspective, the safety data and the safety narratives. So you should never say that you did it all by yourself, but you supported these submissions. Um, how did I do label updates from a CRO side? Now, this labeling is both science and an art, and from a CRO perspective, you may not have a lot of stake in how you can do labeling, but you can always say that you reviewed the data, because labeling always comes from in the label. If you see a label, there will be adverse drug reactions, ADR section. That is what you are more focused on. You're not focused on warnings and precautions. You are more focused on the ADR section, and you would say that you helped in drafting the ADR section based on the safety data. So that's an interview based question, answer. So when you give this kind of answers, there is not much follow through questions. They'll pretty much understand that you kind of know how labeling works, labeling committee works. You can say that you are a part of labeling committee, and you assisted in drafting the ADR section from the compiled safety data. Um, from a CRO side, how did I support PV audits and inspections? Now, CROs always support the sponsors in audits and inspections by making sure two things: they have good training documentation, and they have do good compliance with reporting timelines. So once you have these two things nailed, that should answer that question. Audits and inspections is always based on you work closely with, again, cross-functional teams like quality assurance. You'll work with the sponsor quality assurance to make sure your training documentation is complete, and to make sure not just your but your whole team's training documentation is complete, and your reporting compliance is more than, as I said, 99%. It may how many, like, again, if they say that how many direct reports you have, it is basically based on your CRO level. You should say we had a team of 5 to 10 people, I mean, at least five to 10 people who would support in my day-to-day activities. So any, I mean, coming from a CRO side, you can at least say that. Now, maybe for this role you may not have any direct reports, so don't lead yourself into too much of answering, like saying that, okay, if you say that I had 5 direct reports, they'll say that, hey, in this role you don't have any direct reports, how do you feel about it? You should always say that, as you know, I'm capable of managing a team, but I'm also an individual contributor. So that should be the thing. So until and unless they ask you this kind of questions, you should not be revealing anything from a point of saying I have direct reports, because you don't know how this prospective company is looking at you. Are they willing to hire you to have direct reports or no direct reports? So until unless they ask you, you don't want to volunteer that information. Does the development and implementation of SMP mean preparation of validation assessment report or an SMP? Yeah, straightforward answer. Development and implementation of SMP is always based on an SOP, and SOP is what will dictate who is drafting an SMP, safety management plan, and SMP will always come from the sponsor, from the client, from the CRO side, since you are coming from a CRO side, and you would give it to the sponsor for their approval, and once they approve it, then you implement it. So you don't tell the sponsor what to do. You just suggest that this is the SMP we have, which goes through who is doing what and what is the reporting timelines. And once the sponsor approves, then you implement the SMP with your team. Um, Yeah, so again, the same thing. Did you write a company comment or causality assessment? You will always say, being a medical doctor, being a physician myself, I always have the privilege of writing a company comment or the causality assessment, but the sponsor's approval is needed. There will be an MD on the sponsor side who would approve my assessment, and if there is any discrepancy, or if there's any discussion needed, we would always discuss the case for alignment. A simple answer. Um, Yeah, so again, this question regarding the safety signals with crisis management team to assess and respond to safety signals, this pretty much goes into what I was talking to you earlier with the causality assessment. You would you would assess any safety signal. If you find any signal, you will take it to the sponsor for their review, and once there is an alignment, you would probably participate in their signaling activities. But if they say that this is something that we are already monitoring, or if there is something that there is no alignment, I mean, there is further alignment to be needed, it's always discussions that keeps happening. But it's always good to take the safety signals if you found something that needs to be, because it's not whether you are on the CRO side or whether you are on the sponsor side, it is about patient's safety. That is your core point. So you just have to make sure, in the perspective of making sure the patients are safe, if you think as a physician, this is something that needs further validation or further assessment, you will take it to the client side or the sponsor side for alignment, and based on the directives given, you will take action. Um, Never say that you had direct contact with regulatory authorities, because at this point in your career, I don't think this is really required, because it is only when you reach certain leadership roles is when you will have direct contact with regulatory authorities, being a safety physician or a safety scientist. So I would say, based on my current role, I did not have any direct contact with regulatory authorities or inspectors. Um, uh, Again, the same question, being as a CRO, how did you communicate with clinical teams for clinical trial integrity and all those things? You always say that you went through the sponsor safety physician. So you always will have the discussions mediated, and you will communicate with the clinical trial teams if required through the client safety physicians. Um, Project management will not assign you any tasks. Again, I think most of your questions are based on cross-functional teams, which is very common to have this kind of questions. But I believe what I wanted to tell you is, being on the CRO side, bottom line for most of the questions that you have, being on the CRO side as a safety physician, you always communicate with the safety team and the safety MD. That's the word we use, safety MD, on the other side, on the sponsor side, to communicate with the rest of the company. You don't bypass them and go into any clinical team. In one way, even though it is even though it is an obstacle, it is a necessary obstacle, because the sponsor should know what is happening in your communications with any other clinical trial teams or any other cross functional teams. So again, you are protected by having these conversations or communications through the safety team or the sponsor safety team, so that by the end of the day they can take action on their part. So I think that is pretty much how you have to kind of maneuver your CRO physician role here. Now, as I alluded in the previous answers, when it comes to IB is a very massive document, even though it starts with very minimal clinical trial data. Because when you start a compound, when you start any molecule or a compound in early phase one, you really don't have a lot of clinical trial data, because you don't have subjects enrolled and everything. But understand that IB is both clinical and non-clinical document based on the active moiety or the active compound. So when you are going through the IB, writing an IB or a drafting an IB is a medical writer's job. It's not even a clinical team's job. I mean, by the end of the day, it's a clinical team that needs to make sure the IB is updated annually and IB is maintained annually. But they will have an IB when they go for IND application. IND application, you will have an IB, and IB has to be approved before you even enroll a patient. Your first patient in FIP should be done only after IB is approved or IND is approved. So in that aspect of it, as a safety physician, your role is very minimal in the initial part, because you are just looking at, are all the pharmacovigilance principles covered well based on the recent guidances and mandatory regulatory timelines in the ADR section. So every IB will have an ADR section, it will have an RSI section. So your sections are only those things. So you need to make sure, because IB is a document by which a pharmaceutical company is actually communicating with all their PIs, all the primary investigators, with everyone around the compound. So you want to make sure the definitions of ADRs there, are the seriousness criteria the same, Are there any dose limiting toxicities that they have mentioned, and what are the steps they are taking for dose limiting toxicities, especially in phase 1? um, what is the end points they are talking about. So you will look at the whole document, but your role in the IB will definitely be in these two sections, where you are going through the ADRs, adverse event section, I should say, adverse event section, and the RSI section. Now, when you are doing the RSI section of the IB, initially you are not having any RSI, because your first IB will be pretty much empty, because you don't have any data to support the inclusion of an adverse event into RSI. Maybe in the second year, or the second edition, the third edition, or the fourth edition, or the fourth year, or the third year, you may have some RSI updates based on the information that you have from the clinical trial data, safety data. That is when you would review the data based on SOC, based on the PT terms, and see that if there are any, RSI section of IB is always updated on, there's one guideline that we use. So I forgot the guideline, FSMB guideline, something like that. Um, so based on certain regulatory guidelines, we use a threshold of 2 and above without any confounders. And again, it is all based on quality driven than quantity driven. It's not like if there is only one SAE, it should not make it into the RSI section. It is based on quality. Again, it's like signaling. In signaling, we go for quality more than quantity. And that's why we don't use quantitative methods too much in most of the signaling, especially in clinical trial data. We use those quantitative more in post marketing, because the denominator is higher. But again, RSI section, you'll go through the safety data to see if there is any SAEs that make sense to go into RSI, based on. Let me just tell you what that guidelines is. I forgot RSI guidelines. I completely forgot about this. RSI guidelines, I think it is, do you know that? RSI guidelines, IB.
CTFG,
Huh?
Clinical Trial Facilitation Group Guidelines, CTFG doc.
Yeah, yeah, CTFG. So based on CTFG guidelines, you will go with it with RSI. That is right. So those are the things that I can tell you right off the bat, like how you have to present yourself. And the same in the same line, coming to the last questions that you had, when it comes to writing any technical documents such as IB and DSUR, you always say you were drafting the benefit risk assessments of the aggregate report, or of the IB sections, looking at the
It's
IB
11 o'clock.
sections. So you will always use this benefit risk assessments to be done by you. You are not writing a DSUR from scratch. There will be a medical writer that you will be working closely with from the sponsor side. You will be reviewing the data. There will be safety associates who will be writing safety narratives. You will review that safety narratives written, especially for fatal life-threatening events. If there are anything, then you will do that. So again, all these things you will coordinate, but finally your responsibility as a CRO safety physician most likely will be in drafting the benefit risk assessments and sending it for sponsor approval. Just think of the sponsor approval like you're just getting the sponsor to agree with what you have done, and if there is any discrepancy or any disagreement, you will have further discussions to have further alignment. So that those are the words that you need to keep using. Now, that being said, again, most of the questions that you have in the um, job description related, you're trying to understand their inner working and how their workflow is and everything. Sometimes that might not be good, but it is always good to ask such questions. Like, for example, if they say that, like, you'll be working with some leads, then you can ask, like, what are these leads doing, like what exactly are they doing. they will definitely, kind of come up with some answer to that. Then you will understand how this whole thing works. Again, I believe from the job description, one thing I can tell you is, two things that stand out from the job description is they are looking for some type of physician who can look at non-clinical data, non-clinical information, and come up with, is this something that can translate into a clinical trial, and how can I mitigate the risks from a non-clinical data. Like for example, I always keep saying, if you have some findings in non-clinical, that doesn't have to translate 100% into human trials, but you should have a sense of caution when you kind of look at some SOCs. Like for example, if you have seen some QT prolongations in non-clinical data, and you are looking at the SAEs reported in the first pool of your phase 1 phase 2 trials, and you're seeing more AEs belonging to cardiovascular, you have to have a kind of a sense of urgency in kind of doing further analysis. Hey, is this something related to electrical disturbances? Is this something related to cardiac toxicity? Because we have seen some QT prolongations happening in the non-clinical data. And the same thing, not all the time you have to use the same example, but that is what they are looking at. So once you know the toxicity profile of the drug, and once you know the non-clinical data, you should be in a very good shape to kind of, it's not like you're speculating something and predicting the future, but it's like, okay, this has already happened in animal studies, in non-clinical studies, so I want to be cautious if I see something that spikes my interest in my clinical trials. That is what a safety physician should do. Now, you coming from a medical background, and let us say you are having this physiology background, you can put those pointers in favor of you, saying that because I understand the mechanism of action of the drug, I understand the non-clinical data, I am able to put those things together and make sure that I take necessary risk mitigation activities in phase 2 clinical trial or phase 1 clinical trial, and that is where you will go into the IB. So everything is interlinked. It's not like compartmentalized. Everything is interlinked. So based on that non-clinical data and your medical knowledge with the mechanism of action of the drug clearly understood, and not only just the non-clinical data and the mechanism of action of the drug, you need to also look at the class effect of this drug. If the drug has some competitors already in the market, or if a competitor is actually manufacturing or developing the same kind of drug using a very similar, not exactly, but a similar mechanism of action, then probably you may have more data. Like we always used to say, competitor data is more valuable than our own data sometimes, because they may be little, the clinical trial started 2 years earlier and they are already in phase 2 phase 3, and the compound is very similar, like based on the class effect of the drug. Is that something you want to take into consideration? Again, all these things are meant to help you in helping your patients not have, no, I mean, not to helping you in mitigating these risks before they happen. Like for example, if you know that this drug, when kind of given through, let us say it is given IV, most of the oncology drugs or immunology drugs are given IV, they may end up having, let us say the same example of QT prolongations. Maybe you want to put it in your baseline assessments in the IB, that we want to enroll patients who have a normal EKG. So EKG becomes your primary or baseline assessments. So in the exclusion criteria, you will, in the IB, it will say that patient should not have prior cardiac history, or patient should not have prior EKG abnormalities. So you exclude those patients, so you don't need to have any ambiguous data or confounders when real cardiac toxicity like events happen in your clinical trial. So you're not trying to, don't try to look at this thing as a this job description as a single entity. Don't compartmentalize it. It's pretty much everything is the same. You're trying to make sure the patients who are enrolled in the clinical trial by the end of the day are protected, and are able, and you as a safety physician are able to manage the risks associated with the drug meticulously by being proactive. So those are the words that you need to keep using in these interviews, because that's what they're looking at. They're looking at, are you able to understand it at a core point? It's not like whether you can write a DSUR. It's not like whether you can write an IB. It's not like how well you are able to talk to cross-functional teams. All those things are very nitty-gritties, and they only will be able to know this, or you will be able to know this once you get into the job and kind of go through it on a daily basis. But overall picture, like what I would be looking if I'm hiring someone, is this person able to consolidate all this kind of thoughts and put it in front of me in a way that I'm comfortable enough to hire her for further, you know, refinement once she understands the internal, or he or she understands the internal processes. So how are you going to talk to the leads? How are you going to talk to the evaluation team? How are you going to talk to medical writers? How are you going to talk to clinical operations team? All these things are dependent on, are you able to first of all think in the way that I just narrated to you? Is that making sense?
I understood.
Yeah. All right, Doc. I wish you all the best. Let us know how the interview went, Doc.